beautiful but brisk morning, a little chilly, but nevertheless beautiful to be in Hashem's world. And we're going to be doing now class 98 on the Golden Doves. We're on page 52. In the previous class, we discussed the meaning of Shabbat. I think it really was a profound and real explanation of what the Shabbat is about. So if you didn't already hear that class, I definitely urge you to hear the previous class. I think that was class 97. But as I said, this is now class 98. That God may in fact abstain from creating means that repetition is possible. So because God stops from creating, we can now repeat. Let's explain the connection between the fact that God stops and our ability for repetition. Precisely because there was an interruption, and God abstained from all the work that He had done, nature, as Nieto taught, is to be conceived as repetition of creation. So because Hashem stopped creating, Ubayom HaShevi'i Shabbat, right, He stopped, according to the David Nieto alav Shalom, that's what allows nature to repeat creation, right? So again, every time the sun shines, every time the sun rises in the morning, that's a repetition of the original sunrise, right? Every time the bird sings, as here, that's a repetition of the first bird that sung, right? So there's a connection between God stopping and the concept of repetition. Right? Interruption also posits the irreducible and absolute distance between God's omnipotence and the finitude of creation. Right? And also because there's an interruption, because God stops, in a sense what that means is God kind of withdrew Himself, right? He's not making His presence felt anymore, right? Because He's not there. I mean, He's there, but His presence is not felt. His presence is dissimulated. So we're in a sense saying that there is an irreducible chasm between the infiniteness of God and the finiteness of the universe, right? So that chasm is highlighted by the idea of interruption, right? As contrasted by the psalmist, God counts the numbers of the star. Moneh mispar lekochavim. You see, He counts it. Now, if it was infinite, there would be no counting. But He counts the stars, meaning there's going to be a set number of stars. It could be an incredible number, right? The number of stars in the universe is simply mind-boggling, right? But it's a finite number, nevertheless. But to His intelligence, there is no number, right? So there's a number, there's a finiteness to the number of stars, right? But litvunato en mispar. But God's intelligence is not finite. So you see how, again, God put a number to the stars. He made the universe finite. But the universe is finite. God is not. Litvunato en mispar. Incredible explanation of the pasuk. Again, did you get the explanation? Moneh mispar lekochavim, litvunato en mispar. Fantastic. And that's the irreducible chasm between God and the universe. So it's because of God's stop that we have the ability to repeat, that there's an ability for the universe to exist, right? Repetition here does not imply an identical reproduction of an original thing or event. I love this. So people say, okay, I'm repeating Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach I'm bringing this year is the same thing as the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim. Or the Brit Milah we're doing now is the same thing as the Brit Milah of Avraham Avinu. Yes, but no. to a certain extent. So here goes. Rather, it involves change and transformation, and therefore encoding and decoding. It's not exactly the same. There's a difference. The sunrise that took place a few hours ago, right here, right, was a repetition of the original sunrise, but it was a little different than the original sunrise, right? So when we do a mitzvah, we're recording, we encoded a particular message in the mitzvah, and it has to be decoded. Every time we perform the mitzvah, we decode it again. Specifically, repetition involves encoding the original event. So whenever we do the mitzvah, let's say of Korban Pesach, we're encoding in that action the original Korban Pesach. Thus, the original is always changed. The encoded message is not identical with the original, but the fact that I'm encoding something means this is not the original, right? The object of a decoding process is to transform the encoded message, thereby conceptually recovering the original. So anytime I repeat a mitzvah, so I'm doing a mitzvah that was done 1,000 years ago, and that mitzvah originally was done, let's say by Abraham Avinu, he did the Brit Milah. When I now do the Brit Milah, I'm decoding the original Brit Milah of Abraham Avinu. It's not equal to that Brit Milah. A few remarks. Let me read that. I'm going to repeat. I'm going backwards 2 sentences. Repetition involves encoding the original event. So again, the Brit Milah that I do today encodes the original Brit Milah of Avraham Avinu. And that's why we say, L'achniso bebrito shel Avraham Avinu. Right? So it's there. Right? Thus, the original is always changed. The encoded message is not identical with the original. So there is no metaphysical existence of the Brit Milah of Avraham Avinu. That happened thousands of years ago. Right? All I can do is encode the message of the Brit Milah, but the encoded message is not equal to the original Brit Milah. For example, I have, kibbeh and lahem bajin and sambusag, and we sing lichvot chemda levavi, whatever we do in the Brit Milah. That's not the original Brit Milah. Also, the way the Brit Milah is done is different. The object of a decoding process is to transform the encoded message, thereby conceptually recovering the original. Right? So, we decode what was done by Avraham Avinu, and we recover the original Brit Milah by doing a Brit Milah which itself encodes the original Brit Milah of Avraham Avinu. A few remarks concerning the Hebrew word shana, shin, nun, he, to repeat in Hebrew, will help define this concept. Primarily, this root means to repeat, right? So we repeat something. Like the Mishneh Torah is a repetition of the Torah by Moshe Rabbeinu in Arvot Moab. Connected with the idea of repetition, Shana also means year. Interesting. So the word Shin Nun He also means the year, right? In the sense of the recurrence or repetition of a cycle, because a year always repeats itself. There's a cycle. The sun travels across the sky, the stars and the constellations travel across the sky, and this is a cycle that repeats itself. So there's repetition. The word Shana implies year, implies repetition. In the form Sheni, it means second, right? The second thing. So there's first and there's second. There's Yom Echad. Yom Echad is not a repetition. in Maaseh Bereshit. Yom Sheni is a repetition of the first day. Vayerev Vayiboker happens again, right? Right? So in the form Sheni, it means second, and Sheneh, two. So Sheni, Sheneh. So the word Sheni means to repeat. Yom Sheni, the second one. The word Sheneh is the number two. Also Sheniya. Sheniya means second, right? Right. So there's the Sheniya that means second. The second, I mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 60 seconds in a minute, right? That's second, right? Because the seconds always repeat themselves. The same root also means also to repeat. The same root means also to repeat and to change, right? Right. Likewise, the nominative form mishneh means double. So mishneh, lechem mishneh means a double bread, right? Because it was the man, right? There was double on Friday, yeah. Implying identity with the original and second to. So on the one hand, you identify, maybe you have the 2 loaves of bread on Shabbat, the 2 halot, so you identify with the experience of the double portion of man that took place in the desert, and you encode that experience in the 2 loaves of bread. You have 2 nice baguettes, right? Right. Implying identity with the original, and second to, implying difference, right? So it also means something different, right? So lechem mishneh in the original Torah, lechem mishneh is not identical to the original lechem, right? It's different because the man, it fell double portion, right? So the word mishneh implies a difference. Both senses coalesce in the expression mishneh lamelech, second to the king, like mishneh lamelech Ahashverosh, right? Second to the king. He who is second to the king is not identical to the king. The king is still the king. So second also implies secondary too. On the one hand, the Mishneh is not identical to the king. Okay, it's right here. On the other hand, since he is the royal representative, he's not actually different from the king. He represents the king. So you better respect him. He's there by authority of the king. So you see how repetition implies the original, but it's not equal to the original. Like the Mishneh, the encoded message represents the original, but is not identical to the it, right? So obviously when we have Lechem Mishneh on Shabbat, and just bringing that example, even though it has the word Mishneh, don't confuse it with the idea of I have double bread on Shabbat, encoding the original experience of the Jewish people in the desert, that they had double portions of man, right? So it represents that, right? But it's not equal to that, right? For example, the beracha on the bread is hamosi lechem min haaretz. The beracha on the man was hamosi lechem min hashamayim, right? Like the Mishneh, we said that, right? Repetition implies change and difference from the original. The word shana conveys both alterity, in the sense of it alters, right? There's an alteration, and identity. But it's the same. The second one is, this is the second apple. I'm implying, I wouldn't say apple number 1 and cucumber number 2. That wouldn't make sense, right? The cucumber is not the repetition of the apple. So I wouldn't say apple 1, cucumber 2. No, it was apple number 1, apple number 2, right? So the second apple is a continuation of the first one, but it's not identical to it. The root shana conveys both alterity and identity simultaneously. Repetition and change mutually imply each other. right? So by repeating Veshinantam levanecha, I'm changing. The language that I used to speak to my children is different than the language that my father used to speak to me, and different than the language that his father used to speak to him. The ideas changed, the concepts changed, the emphasis changed, but it's still the original, right? All right. Till next time.